difficult task of anticipating future constitutional needs of our republic and remedies therefore. Despite years of diligent work and learned planning, the need for subsequent improvements, amendments, to the Constitution became apparent during the process of adopting of the Constitution by several states. Yogi Berra famously said, "Predictions are hard to make, especially about the future." Our forefathers, while crafting the Constitution of these United States, had the difficult task of anticipating future constitutional needs of our republic and remedies therefore. Despite years of diligent work and learned planning, the need for subsequent improvements, amendments, to the Constitution became apparent during the process of adopting of the Constitution by several states. 27 amendments have been added. Start the day smarter. Get all the news you need in your inbox each morning. The 25th Amendment outlines the pathways of succession to presidency of United States in case of death, disability, resignation, or removal of a president by impeachment. What the 25th Amendment Section 1 Vice President to assume the duties of the office of the President in case of the above. Appoint a Vice President in case of vacancy. Appointment is subject to by Congress. Whereas the first two sections function in a predictable manner, the next two require active and declaratory actions. Section 3 is invoked when the sitting president submits to President pro tempore of the Senate and Speaker of the House that he is unable to perform his duties. The vice president functions as acting president until the president is able to resume his duties. This occurs, for example, when a president needs medical care. Section 4 is detailed and complex. It deals with the situation where a president is unable to perform duties of his office, but does not realize his limitations or the president 15 by the present council to president is so able to take over as acting president. Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris. Political interests and forces can take over the situation. The president is able to take his duties. Vice President and officers with 4 days to make declaration that Clinton is not to perform his duties. In such a standoff, the ultimate decision is made by a 2/3 majority vote of both houses of Congress. We can honor Biden's service and also help him make his exit. President Joe Biden has served our nation as U.S. Senator 1973 to 2009, Vice President 2009 to 2017, and as President since 2021. His has a record of lifelong service. This should be recognized, regardless of whether we agree with his policies or his politics. At age 81, his physical infirmities are obvious. His mental and cognitive abilities are questionable as seen in the presidential debate on June 27th. Americans who saw his incoherent lapses in debate on live TV have expressed concern about his ability to perform the most demanding job in the world. Considering the dangerous international scene today, it is a national security imperative that we have a strong leader at all times. Until July 21st, President Biden did not recognize reality or stayed in denial. Family, friends, cabinet officers, and party faithful have circled the wagons to protect him out of love, faith, loyalty, or self-interest. More, want a Constitution refresher? Read the attorney results. Now that this has acknowledged his inabilities by withdrawing from the race for parliament, to serve president next month. Of the and perform their duty. of the people, by the people, protected. May God be with us with him. Let us do the right thing, even when it is the difficult thing. Representative Sabi Kumar.
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today? Tommy Nation Politics.
Now, Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, will take the stage at a rally in Las Vegas. They'll be wrapping up a nearly week-long tour through some of the most critical battleground states of this election. The Harris campaign has seen a jolt of voter enthusiasm in the last 3 weeks since President Biden dropped out of the race and she became the party's presumptive nominee. She's new polling showing it's not just vibes. CNN's Harry Enton here to break that polling data down for us. Harry, what do these new New York Times polls show? I've heard from a lot of people about these today, a lot of people with eyes on these.
Yeah, a lot of people. I think this was the type of polling we've been waiting for, right? We've seen that national polling showing movement towards Kamala Harris. Now we get some swing state polling showing something very similar. All right, these are in the Great Lake battleground states. We're talking about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. You go back to May, what'd you see? You saw that a pretty tight race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but you see more red than blue on the screen. Of course, all three of these states were states that Joe Biden carried last time around. You saw a 3-point lead for Trump in Pennsylvania, one well within the margin of error in Wisconsin, and then a 1-point lead for Biden, Michigan. But look at where we are now. This is the type of movement the Harris campaign has been looking for. Look in Pennsylvania, a 4-point advantage. Wisconsin, a 4-point advantage. Michigan, a 4-point advantage. And in all three of these states, we see clear movement towards the Democratic nominee. I will point out we're still in no clear leader land in this particular instance, but the Harris campaign has to love this movement. 7 points in Pennsylvania, 5 points in Wisconsin, and 3 points in the great state of Michigan, all moving towards Kamala Harris. And she has the advantage in all three, although, again, no clear leader within the margin of error.
Right. Important to keep that context in mind. Now, these aren't the only swing state polls that are showing Trump slipping.
That's exactly right. You know, if we were just talking about the New York Times, Siena College, I'd say, you know what, hold on a second, hold on. You know me, Jessica. You know that I like to see confirmation of an individual poll. So there were Ipsos polls that were conducted in these same states. And I want you to look, this is an aggregate, of course, across Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You go back to June, what'd you see? You saw Trump on average up by 2 points. Very similar to what we saw in the New York Times Siena College poll. Look at where we are now, the August margin between Harris and Trump, and look at what we see here. We see Harris up by 2 points. Again, no clear leader, but that 4-point movement, very similar to what we saw in the New York Times Siena College poll. And this is what we're seeing across the polling data. It's not just one poll. It's not just one pollster. It's across pollsters. It's across polls. And of course, in these Great Lake battleground states that are going to be so important, we're seeing this 4-point move with, instead of seeing a small Republican lead, we're seeing a small Democratic Party lead, and in this particular case, a small Kamala Harris lead over Donald Trump, the reverse of what we were just seeing just 2 months ago.
Yeah, and of course, the reason we care about these particular states so much is because of the Electoral College and how this all is decided in the fall. What does this data mean for the Electoral College more broadly and how that's playing out?
Yeah, so look, this is what we're talking about, the race to 270 electoral votes. And I want to give Kamala Harris those Great Lake battleground states where she was leading, although within the margin of error. We're talking about Wisconsin, we're talking Michigan, we're talking Pennsylvania. If we give those 3 states to Kamala Harris, even if she loses in Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, which are far from guarantees, these, of course, were 3 states that Joe Biden carried last time around, but in which the Democrats have been falling a little bit short of their 2020 numbers, at least in recent data, at least when Joe Biden's in the race. But if we give Harris Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, look at that. She doesn't even need these Sunbelt battleground states. She gets to exactly 270 electoral votes. So the fact is, when you see those polls in those Great Lake battleground states, and you see that Harris has turned the tide around from basically, you know, Donald Trump being slightly ahead to now Harris being slightly ahead, that could be the entire ballgame. Even if she loses down south, if she wins up north, that's enough That gets her to exactly 270 electoral votes, and that's why those New York Times Siena College polls, as well as those Ipsos polling data, why it means so much.
And so here we are. We're probably, I'm ballparking it here, 80-something days away from the election at this point. How much can things change from now until the election?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of movement in the last 2 to 3 months, and I just want to note that the movement that we've seen towards Harris could easily reverse itself. And the reason I say that is because how far off were the polls on August 10th compared to the final margin in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin? On average in 2016, the average from the polls at this point to the final margin, 9 points across those 3 states. How about in 2020? Look at that. The average movement from the final poll, from the polls at this point to the final margin, look at that, 5 points. So the fact is, yes, Kamala Harris may be slightly ahead right now. Again, though, a race in which there's no clear leader within the margin of error, but that could easily turn around in the final, let's say, a little bit less than 3 months to go. There's still a lot of campaign to go. We got a Democratic National Convention to go. We probably have at least one more debate to go. So still a lot can change. But at the end of the day, Jessica, if you are the Democratic Party and you were looking at the polls 2, 3 months ago and you compare it where you look now, I think for no doubt they'd rather look at this picture in August than the picture they were looking at May. It's a much more rosy picture for the Democratic Party, but still a lot of campaign.
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today? Tommy Nation Politics.
The vice president has still failed to acknowledge that it was wrong to take the position that he took at that time. Listen, I mean, talk about now running for president and you change your position. Do you now say that you have evolved and you regret that? Because you've only, since you've been running for president this time, said that you in some way would take that back, or you didn't agree with the decision that you made over many, many years.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that.
And your response.
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Now you talk about terror. What about for me? I've been terrorized all my day. All my day.
According to the Center on Poverty and Social Policy at Columbia University, 14.3% of Americans, nearly 50 million people, were living in poverty as of last December. If America's poor founded a country, Matt Desmond writes in his book Poverty by America, that country would have a bigger population than Australia or Venezuela. Almost 1 in 9 Americans, including 1 in 8 children, live in poverty. There are more than 38 million people living in the United States who cannot afford basic necessities, and more than 108 million getting by on $55,000 a year or less, many stuck in that space, he writes, between poverty and security. More than 1 million of our public school children are homeless, living in motels, cars, shelters, and abandoned buildings. More than 2 million Americans don't have running water or a flushing toilet at home. These statistics are bad enough, but when seen through the lens of institutionalized racism, they are even worse. In 2019, the median white household had a net worth of $188,200 compared with $24,100 for the median black household. And yet, as Desmond writes, spending on the nation's 13 largest means-tested programs, aid reserved for Americans who fall below a certain income level, went from $1,015 a person the year Ronald Reagan was elected president to $3,419 a person 1 year into Donald Trump's administration. That's a 237% increase. Why does poverty on this scale exist, given our affluence? Desmond argues that poverty in America is not an accident. It is by design. The majority of Americans, he writes, benefit from a system that callously exploits the poor. Joining me to discuss his book, Poverty by America, is Matthew Desmond, professor of sociology at Princeton University. Matt, you write about what you call a hard bottom layer of deprivation, a kind of extreme poverty once thought to exist only in faraway places of bare feet and swollen bellies. And this is the 1 in 50 Americans who receive no cash income. I just want to begin there. If you can talk about the consequences of this extreme poverty, which I should add, coming out of the New York Times, has been rendered virtually invisible by the media.
Well, it's good to see you, Chris. Thanks for having me. For my last book on eviction, I lived in 2 very poor neighborhoods in Milwaukee and saw a kind of poverty that I'd never seen before, never experienced before myself. I saw grandmas living without heat in the winter and in mobile homes, just piled under blankets and praying the space heater didn't go out. It was routine to see children being evicted. If you've ever been to eviction court, you just see a ton of kids running around those courts and being put out on the streets every single day in a city like Milwaukee. And so I think that really sharpened and focused what I understand to be American poverty today. And poverty is measured as an income level, but of course it's this piling on of problems and adversities and humiliations. It's that nauseating fear of eviction. It's telling your kids they can't have seconds. It's debt collector harassments that often is physical pain and toothache on top of getting roughed up by the police, living in slum housing conditions. And that kind of tight knot of social maladies is what poverty in America is today for those at the very bottom.
Well, it's what Barbara Ehrenreich called living in poverty one long emergency. And I think you raised that in the book, that there has consequences, not just social and economic consequences, but deep emotional and psychological consequences because it's constant trauma. But I want to talk about, this is not something that I knew before I read your book, because we have this argument that we're always in austerity programs, slashing programs. We got to cut the military budget, which I think we do. But what you lay out is that we've increased spending on means-tested programs 130% between 1980 and 2018, from $630 to $1,448 per person. But poverty's gotten worse. And I'll let you explain why. What's happened to that money?
So this is a paradox, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that, if it's okay with you. So a lot of times when people see that paradox, they'll say, okay, spending on poverty has gone up, but poverty's been pretty persistent over the years. If you look at the supplemental poverty measure, which captures a lot of that spending, 50 years ago it was about 15%. 40 years, 40 years after that, it was 15%. Really stable. The supplemental poverty measure dipped down a little bit before COVID, and then it plunged actually during the pandemic because of this incredible historic bold relief from the government. But what's going on? And some people say, well, if we're spending more and not really helping the problem, those programs don't work. And that's just false. That's empirically false. There's a ton of research that shows that government programs are effective. They're essential. They prevent millions of families from hunger and homelessness each year. So what's going on? What explains this paradox? And what explains it is that the job market isn't really pulling its weight, and we've failed to address the unrelenting exploitation of the poor in the labor market, but also in the housing and financial markets as well. So if you look at when the War on Poverty was launched in the Great Society in 1964, these were deep investments in the poorest families in America, right? This was like making food aid permanent, expanding Social Security, founding Medicaid. And those programs, 10 years later after they were launched, they cut the poverty rate in half. But they weren't fighting poverty alone. 1 in 3 workers at that time belonged to a union. Real wages were increasing. You had some prosperity in the labor market, and the labor movement was strong, but as workers lost power, the job market got a lot worse, wages stagnated, and so now we have to spend more to kind of stay in the same place. And I think this is fundamental for those of us who care about ending poverty in America today, because it means we don't just need deeper investments, we need different ones that really cut at the root of poverty.
Well, you also point out that the way this money is distributed has changed dramatically. Clinton's destruction of the welfare system meant the money was sent to the states. And you noted in the book that not only how difficult and complicated it is to apply for assistance, but you had a figure that over $1 billion of Social Security funds are spent not on getting people disability, but on getting lawyers so they can get disability.
Right. I learned this when my friend Wu was going through the process. Wu and I lived together in Milwaukee, and he stepped on a nail in this rundown apartment we shared in a rooming house, and his leg got infected, and he has diabetes, and that infection was accelerated by that, and the doctors eventually amputated his leg. He was one of the hardest working guys I knew. He was a security guard. He often worked double shifts, was out all hours of the night. But he couldn't work, after they took his leg. And so we applied for disability together, and the application got rejected. And to Wu, this was like a normal thing. He was like, well, I got to hire a lawyer now. And so working on contingency, the lawyer kind of fought for Wu. And if they win, they get a chunk of the back pay. And that's what happened to my friend. Wu got about $3,600 in back pay, used to buy a wheelchair accessible van that ran for a few years and then caught on fire. And his lawyer took him $400. And, Wu never lost any sleep over that. But I was just like, it was hard for me to get over the fact that, every year, $1 billion, billion with a B, doesn't go to folks like Wu, right? It goes to lawyers to help folks like Wu get on disability. And so part of the mystery, part of the paradox is that $1 in the federal budget doesn't necessarily mean $1 in a family's hand.
Well, you also write in the book how money that's supposed to go to the poor gets diverted by states in particular.
Yeah, that's right. So if you look at cash welfare, right, temporary assistance to needy families, or TANF, right, this is a big program. It's about $32 billion a year, and it's a block grant, which is just a fancy, wonky way of saying, okay, states, here's the money. You can decide how to spend it. And man, states are very creative about how they spend those welfare dollars. Maine uses them to fund Christian summer camps. Other states use those funds to fund anti-abortion education, abstinence-only programs, marriage initiatives, things that don't really have anything to do with helping the poorest kids and the poorest parents in those states. Some states don't even spend the money. So last time I checked, Tennessee was sitting on over $700 million in unused welfare funds. Hawaii was sitting on so much they could give every poor kid in their state $10,000. And so you're right, because we've kind of allocated this money in a way that doesn't give the government, the federal government anyway, kind of oversight, states have really used this in ways that don't directly impact the poorest families in their borders.
Do you have a theory as to why? Why would you sit on $700 million that should go to the poor?
It's a good question. I mean, it's hard to think this is by accident, right? Every state does this except Kentucky. Kentucky is the only state in the nation that spends most of its cash welfare dollars on direct assistance to needy families. But for most other states, it turns out that $1 budgeted for cash welfare, only 22 cents ends up in the pockets of the poor. And it's hard to read that as an accident. It's hard to read that as something other than by design and kind of a state-sponsored callousness and a negligence to alleviating the suffering of the poorest families in the country.
I want to go to the American Enterprise Institute. They have their 3 steps to avoid poverty. And they are: graduate from high school, obtain a full-time job, wait until you get married to have children. And then these steps are called the success sequence. And then one of their studies found that only 2% of people who completes the sequence were poor in 2007, compared to 76% of people who violated their 3 rules. Now, I mean, you just ripped apart the data, but this is the classic kind of subterfuge. It's right up there with welfare queens, but explain what they're doing and what the reality is.
I wish it were that simple. I truly do. I truly wish that all we needed to do was follow these 3 steps. And it's a little confusing because this is the stuff we tell our kids. We tell work hard, study hard, graduate from high school, put off having kids for a while. And I think that's good parenting advice. But good parenting advice isn't necessarily good social theory. And when you look in the data, you realize that most of that benefit is just driven by getting a job,
Yeah.
getting a full-time job. If you're getting a full-time job, it is a clear pathway out of poverty sometimes. But if you look at the data, more people followed the success sequence than didn't, who are poor. And, the difference between Black Americans who followed the rules and white Americans who did, there's big differences. Black folks are far less likely to escape poverty, even when they check all three of those boxes. And I just also think, as someone that spends a lot of time in poor neighborhoods, that has family and dear friends that are struggling with poverty, for folks that have faced serious adversity since birth, asking them to just, get a good job and just, delay having kids. And, it's kind of asking them to have a different life sometimes. And I don't think that we devalue the importance of work or education or marriage when we just kind of say, this isn't going to cut it, And I think the international comparison for me is really telling. We have so much more poverty than many of our peer nations. And it's not because folks in Germany or South Korea or Canada are working harder or playing by the rules better than we are. There's something deeper in our system that needs to be addressed.
There was an interesting point you made in the book about or challenging this orthodoxy, this economic orthodoxy that says that raising the minimum wage leads to higher unemployment. And you kind of imploded that theory. Explain.
So this has been a concern for a lot of us for a long time, and it started in the 40s. And there was an economist named George Stigler, and he said, "Look, we can't raise the minimum wage because that's going to cost jobs. If you're an employer and you have to pay your workers more, you're going to hire fewer of them." And he wrote a paper on that, and it became kind of canonical in economics. But if you read the paper, you realize there's no data in the paper. It was just kind of an elegant theory. And it kind of makes sense. When you hear it, you say, okay, that makes sense. But in 1994, a couple of economists at Princeton, they realized there was a natural experiment going on. New Jersey was going to raise its minimum wage and Pennsylvania wasn't. And they said, all right, let's test Stigler's hypothesis. Let's see if he's right. And it turns out he was wrong. It turns out there was a lot of job growth actually in New Jersey and not in Pennsylvania. So in that case, it wasn't that New Jersey lost a lot of jobs, they actually gained them. And so since that time, that paper came out in 1994, which is a bombshell paper. Economists have done a lot of studies looking into the effects of raising minimum wage on employment. And the best studies have found that the effect is really negligible. We can absolutely raise the minimum wage without costing jobs in this country. And again, if you look at Denmark, the guy that's flipping burgers over there is paid twice as much as the guy that's flipping burgers here. And somehow their country hasn't collapsed into ruin. And so I also think it's important to ask another empirical question on the minimum wage, which is what happens when we don't? What do we cost people? And we cost them life and family and health. We cost them kind of a full existence in the richest country on the planet. I think that's another question that's worth exploring too.
Well, you have a character. I mean, you juxtapose what happens when his minimum wage salary is raised in terms of his lifestyle, in terms of stress, the ability to be with family, all of that, as you point out. You go back a lot in the book to the importance of raising wages, but also unions. And of course, most people in unions are firefighters, nurses, police, other public sector workers. Nearly all private sector employees, that's 94%, are without a union. And I wondered if you could just address what that has meant for the working class and the working poor. And then also this idea that non-unionized businesses, as anti-union champions claim, are somehow more productive.
So if you look in modern history and you ask, when was the most economically equitable time in our country? When was CEO pay reined in and worker pay climbing? That was in the 70s. And that was when worker power was at its max, when unions kind of were at their full strength in America. And that wasn't a perfect time by any means. We have to address the fact that many unions were racist. They barred Black and Latino people from their ranks. But they also did massive good to raise wages for the rank and file, including the poorest paid workers and including people in non-unionized shops, right? Because if you were working in a union shop and right across the road was a non-unionized shop, the non-unionized guys were like, man, Chris is going to come. Chris is, there's no way my workers are going to work for me if I don't get up to those union standards. But as workers lost power, as unions were attacked, as manufacturing left the country and unions lost their traditional power base, worker power stumbled. And that's when you saw this massive pay raise for the richest Americans in the country. And that's when you saw wages starting to stagnate. So between 1945 and 1979, real wages, inflation-adjusted wages, increased by about 2% every year. So you had a job, you had some room for advancement, your pay went up every year, you had some benefits. But since 1979, real wages have only increased by about 0.3% a year. And for men without a college degree, their inflation-adjusted wages today are less than they were 50 years ago. This has to be addressed. We have to address exploitation in the labor movement, in the labor market, I should say. And if we don't do that, we're kind of be in this place where we're spending more to stay in the same place.
And this raises a point you make in the book, that when you're not paying workers even a subsistence salary, it's not work that keeps poorly paid workers from poverty, but the state. And then I just wondered if you could explain what you call the new fissured workplace.
Yeah, it's not my term. It's been around for a while in social science, but basically it means, there used to be a time where if you worked for Ford, you worked for Ford. Ford signed your paycheck and you were an employee of Ford. But today, if you look at Apple and Google and many of our biggest corporations today, most people that work for those corporations don't work for Apple and Google. They're independent contractors. And there's kind of a two-tiered system of work. There's software engineers and corporate bosses and attorneys, and they work for Google, and there's strong benefits, strong pay. But then there's a lot of independent contractors that the room for advancement is really tough, almost impossible sometimes. The wages often are stagnant. The benefits are not really there. And so this is a way to have like a very profitable work environment, but one that comes at a cost for all those folks that really are gig workers. And I think that when we think of the gig economy, we usually think of Uber and Lyft and TaskRabbit and DoorDash, places where we really are interacting with the gig economy. But there's gig workers in universities and hospitals and hard hat jobs. It's an incredibly big and growing part of our economy now.
And we should just be clear, a gig worker, you don't have benefits, you don't have job protection, you don't have health insurance. I was just part of the strike of adjuncts and Rutgers. You have people teaching full course loads, trying to live on $28,000 a year.
Game over.
Game over.
A dementia patient is president because it doesn't matter who the president is. So it turns out the dementia symptoms Biden supporters have long dismissed as a stutter are actually exactly what they look like. The special counsel assigned to investigate Joe Biden for mishandling classified documents reports that investigators, quote, uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen, but concludes that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter, which normally would be cause for a sigh of relief by this administration and its supporters. Except that among the reasons given for this conclusion is that the president has gone senile. We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview with him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Special counsel Robert Hur writes to Attorney General Merrick Garland, saying that Mr. Biden's memory was significantly limited, both during his recorded interviews with the ghostwriter in 2017 and in his interview with our office in 2023. And his cooperation with our investigation will likely convince some jurors that he made an innocent mistake rather than acting willfully. That is, with intent to break the law, as the statute requires. Her reports that in interviews, Biden couldn't even remember things as fundamental as the years of his term as vice president or when his son between the aforementioned recorded 2017 interviews and the interviews with the president last year. In short, the president's brain don't work. It's shot. The leader of the free world, quote unquote, has rusted out gray matter. It's like Swiss cheese in there. And it is indeed getting worse. During a press conference in which Biden was ostensibly meant to reassure the world that his brain is working fine in light of the big news, the president referred to the president of Egypt as the president of Mexico and froze mid-speech when he unsuccessfully tried to remember where his son got the rosary he carries from. Just this week, Biden has mistakenly referred to dead European leaders as still being in office, not once, but twice. If you are still laboring under the delusion that it matters who the U.S. president is, the fact that an actual, literal dementia patient has held that office for 3 years now should dispel that notion once and for all. The U.S. empire has been marching along in exactly the same way it was before Biden took office, completely unhindered by the fact that the person who's supposedly calling the shots is in a state of degenerative neurological freefall. Literally anyone could hold that office, and it would make no meaningful difference in the way the U.S. empire is run. A coma patient could be president. A jar of Kalamata olives could be president. The position which Americans hold elections over in the belief that it could bring positive changes to their country and their world is nothing but a figurehead. Which is a bit of a problem for Americans who would like to change certain aspects of their government's behavior. Like, for example, the backing of whose conscience do they work to appeal to if the person they were told is in charge actually isn't? Who do they vote for if the people who really call the shots aren't even on the ballot? The fact that the U.S. president has dementia exposes the uncomfortable truth that the functioning of the empire is too important to be left in the hands of voters. There's too much power riding on the behavior of the U.S. government from year to year for the electorate to be permitted a say in it. The globe-spanning power structure that is centralized around the United States is run not by the official elected government of that nation, but by unelected empire managers who filter in and out of each administration and maintain a steady presence in government agencies and government-adjacent institutions. These empire managers form alliance corporate powers and working relationships with the many nations, assets, and partners who function as members of the undeclared U.S. empire. Which means there's not really any way for Americans to vote their way out of this mess. If you have a problem with genocide, militarism, economic injustice, authoritarianism, or any other crucial building block for the U.S. centralized power structure, you will never be permitted to have any influence over those things through the official like letting a toddler play with a toy steering wheel while you drive so they can feel like they're participating. Now, that doesn't mean there's no way out of this mess. It just means there's no way out of this mess that involves voting. We're already seeing pro-Palestine significant obstacles in the operations of Israeli weapons dealers, and the push to eradicate and inform the public about what's happening in Gaza has caused Israel to lose control of the narrative so severely that it's now resorting to desperate online influence ops. Measures like this can be implemented across the board to bring about the end of the imperial power structure. Once enough people begin turning against the empire, using the power of our numbers to force real change will quickly move from impossible to possible to likely to inevitable. But But we've got to stop hanging all our hopes on the electoral system first. Every 4 years, we see American attention get sucked up into this empty puppet show about which soulless empire manager should be the temporary official figurehead at the front desk of the permanent imperial machine. And if you want to vote, by all means, go ahead and vote. But don't let that performative ritual distract you from the real project. To wake up our humans and begin forcing real change.
Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Reminder to support the broadcast. Your support is crucial.
I'm about to go sell tacos, guys. This is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. Free-thinking, innovative, open-minded, new progressive media. And sorry about all the, the stops. My internet, Wi-Fi, I live in an apartment complex in Texas. What can I say? Working class, doing my best to open the minds and hearts of the American people, whose power was usurped by the tyrants, Democrats and Republicans. You're going to try to vote for them this November, believing it's some kind of civic duty. I don't understand it. I'll just not say anything at the time, just so I'm not, looked at as weird or non-social or whatnot. But I think it's time for Americans to self-reflect on their own behaviors and think about the butterfly effect. Think about the positive impacts that you make on your community that reverberate around the world and in your own communities. Think about the service that you do to contribute to society and how you treat people. Think about how those things matter. All around the country, guys, there's a whole bunch of selfish people. There's greedy people. All of them are in power. Evil is winning, thanks to the lesser of two evils. Argument or gamble. It's time the American people actually stand up for what's right and what's true. That's why I am podcasting. That's my message, guys. Be free-thinking, innovative, open-minded. Remember those values that you learned as kids, tell the truth. Always be respectful of everyone. Find a place where your strengths can allow you to prosper. Those things are still important. It's not just a story of two parties where each of them is a protagonist and the other's a threat to democracy or supporting trans kids or whatnot. Aren't you tired of the same old story, guys? Where they're the winners? Where they take all the power in the election victory? Where nothing fundamentally changes? And we're left with absolute chaos, crime, non-prosperity, concern for the cost of living rising, stagnant wages. This November, when you go to the ballot box, if you do, really consider what you are doing and really consider the definition of insanity, doing the same thing, expecting different results. Because at this point, guys, after 70 years of neoliberal policies and a duopoly uniparty system, if you still are casting your votes, wondering if this orange billionaire is going to care about you enough to cut your taxes, or if this black Indonesian woman is going to think about you because you might be black or Indonesian, for one moment, they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about their campaign finance contributions. Trump thinking about Sheldon Adelson, thinking about Prager, thinking about probably, Tim Pool. He's pretty rich now. If you want to be thought about, why don't you give him a check, a big check? He needs one for his indictments, his legal troubles. And Kamala, she needs checks, bro, because her husband's the one that's rich. When he finally divorces her, bro, do you think that she's gonna get alimony or something? Probably not. She'll probably laugh her way out of it. But in any case, guys, the biggest thing really affecting us is we'll have a demented guy in the White House, and he's the president. we all need to really, we need to figure out ourselves, you know, what the hell is going on? What's going on with our country? What's going on with our president? Is Joe still there? Have y'all seen him?
This is why I stopped shopping on Amazon.
Oh my God. Do you know why I stopped shopping on Amazon? Because I was literally just fucking buying everything, bro. I love these fucking Amazon fucking...
Don't spend it.
You can't go anywhere on YouTube without an Amazon commercial. I mean, the capitalists will win, no matter what, bro. I promise you. You know who won't win?
Neck and neck race would have been down the wire. But what happened was...
What happened was...
my Democrats...
Well, what happened was...
House and Senate thought that I was going to hurt them in the races.
Mm.
And I was concerned if I stayed in the race, that would be the topic. You be interviewing about why...
You being a fucking loser, dementia-riddled death rattle. That'd be everybody be talking about that instead of your fucking election. It's crazy. U.S. President Joe Biden revealed further details about his decision to drop out of the 2024 presidential race very recently, guys. It appears that he has some enemies in his own party. An interview with CBS News' Bob Costa on Sunday, he referred to some of his dubious comrades in the Democratic Party. A few of them contributed a lot to his decision. A lot. Nancy Pelosi, 81-year-old fucking alcoholic, Porsche driver, and fucking crazed insider trader. And of course, Barack Hussein Obama, the first black president and Wall Street's bitch. Also, a number of Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate thought that he was going to hurt their races as well. And of course, when you hurt the food chain, when you fuck with the money, well, the oldest ever sitting president saw himself become a transition president. A transition president, a lame duck, guys, in his only term, in his last few months as head of state, commander of the armed forces. And we're all wondering, at this point, what the fuck is he still doing in office? That's what I'm wondering. You guys wondering that? Because there's been all this talk about the 25th Amendment, guys. First of all, I just want to say to Joe, Sansa Stark has a few words for your fucking presidency.
Don't kill me. I'm part of you.
Your words will disappear. Your house will disappear. Your name will disappear. All memory of you will disappear.
Bum, bum, ba, ba, bum, bum, ba, ba, bum. Play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. I mean, there is no in-between, guys. But in between the lies and the fucking usurping of the reins of government from the people, we can suss out exactly what is going on. Because in the news, Politico and the New York Times, people are talking about a coup. Wall Street Journal. Was there a coup that happened in the Democratic Party? I had to figure it out, guys. I had to figure it out. I had to go on a hunt for information. It's a dubious task in the 21st century, of course, because there's so many liars who have websites. But sussing out the, of course, the usual suspects, they usually have some shreds of truth behind their non-resourced or sources cited articles. One place I went was Real Clear Politics. I put the link up here on top of the screen, as you can go to. Click. Those are my sources. See, I cite sources. How come the New York Times doesn't? How come Reuters doesn't? I don't know. But Biden, apparently Seymour Hersh, this guy who's he's all in with the government intelligence officers and bureaucrats that actually make the policies and are in charge of the country, and not the figurehead, of course, the states that we vote for. If our votes had power, remember that, they wouldn't let us do it. But apparently Obama called Biden after breakfast sometime in July, after, he got on all the shows, and he was like, look, let me tell you something. This is America. I could do the bestest, darndest, goodest job. I promise you, boss. Well, Biden, he got a call from Obama, and Obama was like, let me be clear. Get all the races, Joe. Joe killers. So according to Real Clear Politics, it's not real clear about like the exact words that were happening, but somewhere along the lines of Obama said that Kamala Harris was going to fucking invoke the 25th Amendment, and he was going to leave. He was going to have to get out of office because he's not fit, right? Or you could just step down, Joe. So Joe, he stepped down. He wasn't supposed to endorse Kamala. Obama didn't endorse Kamala. Nobody has faith in Kamala. She's probably going to lose, just based on her fucking incompetence. They weren't ready to endorse her, but Biden was supposedly so angry about Obama literally telling him to drop out, ordering the president of the United States around. On his way out, he fucking sent a tweet and endorsing Kamala Harris and setting in motion this whole undemocratic series of affairs with the Democratic Party. It's hilarious. The last laugh goes to the old man from Delaware. But in my opinion, guys, and I'll be asking all of you guys, I'd like to ask all Americans, if Kamala Harris were ready to invoke the 25th Amendment, which basically transfers power to the VP, because Biden or the president is unfit to do his duties, why is it that they held it as a threat and that they did not invoke it? Because he's still in the office today, guys. What is he doing? Do y'all know? Aren't y'all a little freaked out about the fact that this guy was threatened to have the 25th Amendment invoked on him? He didn't have it. He's still in office. If I were Kamala, I would have just done it. It would have at least given some semblance of legitimacy to her fucking frontrunner status as the head nominee in the convention that's upcoming in the Democratic Chicago convention upcoming. Well, she will be crowned as the Democratic nominee to run against Donald Trump. I mean, if she invoked the 25th Amendment, that would actually give her a legitimate reason to be a fucking frontrunner, because she has no delegates. She won no primaries. She won no states. She won no elections. I mean, if she should have just invoked the 25th Amendment. I mean, it's been done before, and believe it or not, guys, looking up some past history with this administration. Did you know that in 2002 and 2007, George W. Bush had a procedure where he allowed Dick Cheney to be president for those times? He temporarily transferred power to the VP as he was going under the knife. Did y'all know that? And as well, President Biden invoked the 25th Amendment himself, temporarily transferring power to VP Kamala Harris on one of his surgeries. In accordance with the provisions of Section 3 of the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, this letter shall be my written declaration that I am presently unable to discharge my powers and duties of the office of the President of the United States. Biden wrote in a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at 10:10 a.m. on July, what was it? July, what the fuck? Come on, give me a date here. I'm at lawandcrime.com/politics/President Biden invokes 25th Amendment. Don't give me a date here. Am I supposed to keep on reading? Oh, 2009, July 9th, 2009. 2009. Was he president then? No. This can't be right. What the fuck is going on? What the hell? Okay, here's the letter. November 19th, 2021. To the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. I will undergo routine medical surgery. I will not be able to do my duties as President of the United States. This letter shall constitute my written declaration. I am presently unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. Pursuant to Section 3, the Vice President shall discharge the powers and duties as acting President. Check that out. I'm going to download that. Woohoo! Law and Crime for Sources. Look at that, bitch. Look at that shit. Look at that shit. Hey! Props to you guys. Props to you guys for having sources. Sources. Fucking really I'm gonna eat that shit up. Eat that shit. No. So guys, it's been done before. Y'all know that. Ain't no big deal, right? So why would you leave a dementia-riddled old man in the office of president now? And leave yourself with absolutely no moniker of legitimacy going into the general election, where people that didn't vote for you in the primaries, Kamala, have to vote for you in the general. Isn't that awkward? Does that look like not democracy? aren't you talking about how Trump is a threat to democracy and you have to uphold democracy and now you're not having democracy? Is that weird? Is that weird? It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Isn't it? It is, isn't it? So that's cool, man. Law and crime, bro. Check that out. So, with all those facts and little keynote tidbits in your noggin, what do you think, guys, about the upcoming and present race, where the most influential Democrat in the party, with the nomination, already in hand, as Biden's delegates go to Kamala after his endorsement? What do you think about the undemocratic party leaders and their amplifying concerns that impacted Biden's candidacy? Do you think that was democratic or undemocratic? Yes or no? Do you think that Joe Biden is still fit to hold office? And if so, why is he still in office? Why wasn't the 25th Amendment invoked? If this guy's is too fucking unstable to run for, why is he still in office now? What is Joe Biden doing right now? Does he have his finger on the nuke, bro? Does he remember where he is in the White House? Is he talking to foreign leaders about our secrets? Because I know he had classified documents in his chef. What was it? It was from Bo. It was a gift. How dare you? What else car is that? It was a Corvette, right? These are all interesting questions, guys, that really, actually, they kind of relate and impact us. So what do y'all think? You have any comments, concerns, questions yourself? I suspected we'll never get the answers, especially during this polarized and propagandized election upcoming, that only a hunger for power can ever quench. And the manifestation of evil is transparently on the way. As you gear up to vote for the lesser of two evils, I just want to maybe give you one little reflection of insight that you might be heralding the end of times, the last war, the war where the wrath of God is spilled down upon us all. So, in the words of Sansa House Stark, to her, I guess, estranged husband, Ramsay Bolton,
Your words will disappear. Your house will disappear. Your name will disappear. All memory of you will disappear.
Short and dementia-riddled silence for our 46th president, Joseph Elizabeth Biden, currently in office. Nobody knows what he's doing or where he is, but he's there, and he's apparently fit to hold up his office there. It's interesting. It's ironic. Makes no sense. It's mad, isn't it? It's a mad world we live in. But in a mad world we live in, feel free to tune in to Tommy Nation Politics, a free-thinking, innovative, open-minded, new progressive media, and maybe we can shine the light in the darkness and the corruption of the elite, powerful ruling class manufacturing consent for their own evil, insidious devices. Tommy Nation Politics.